It started so quietly, I almost missed it. I was standing at the counter of a mid-tier cafe chain, the kind that still let you pretend you were choosing instead of simply complying, flipping absent-mindedly through the curated meal suggestions on the wall-sized screen when my wrist buzzed. I glanced down, expecting a low battery alert or a promo push I'd ignore, but what stared back at me was colder, more clinical. Consumption warning, red meat allowance exceeded, credit score adjusted, -2 inches. I frowned, rereading it twice as if repetition might alter the meaning. My thumb hovered over the acknowledge button, but something in me resisted, a petty act of rebellion even now. The cashier, a kid barely old enough to need a shave, watched me without really seeing me, just tracking the little halo of my authorization light, already dimming into a duller blue. His training kicked in and he offered the corporate-mandated soft script, "Still want it, sir?" As if that question was anything but rhetorical in a place like this. I nodded, jaw tight, and completed the purchase manually, ignoring the tiny delay that suggested my profile was being double-checked somewhere upstream. The burger tasted like it always did, overprocessed, barely warm, dense with the comfort of habit. Yet as I chewed, the aftertaste wasn't meat or salt or grease. It was shame. I told myself it was ridiculous, a glitch in the new eco-sustainability incentive program, a misplaced flag from one of the thousands of micro-monitors that quietly sifted through everyone's transactions. It wasn't personal. It couldn't be. They said the food sustainability protocols were voluntary. They said the eco-credit system was rewards-based, not punitive. They said a lot of things. Later that night, in the stale hum of my apartment's recycled air, I opened my credit app out of morbid curiosity. My score had dropped by 2 points exactly, but the flag was what caught my eye. A yellow marker pulsing next to my name, flashing behavioral deviation, dietary noncompliance. No immediate consequences attached, just a note. A whisper in the algorithm's ear. Watch this one. I shrugged it off. One burger wasn't going to ruin my life. I wasn't one of those people, the chronic offenders, the habitual drifters from the optimized path. I was solid, steady, predictable. Or so I thought. 2 days later, rain hammered the city like it was trying to erase it, washing neon reflections down the gutters as I hurried home. Under the overpass near the station, a homeless man huddled against the concrete, shivering in a poncho made from stitched-together shopping bags. His sign was as weather-beaten as he was. Hungry. Please. I hesitated only a moment before digging into my pocket. Paper money was almost an artifact now, but I still carried a few 20s, relics from a time when transactions didn't track your soul. I pressed one into his hand, quick and clumsy, hoping no one saw. I was wrong. My wrist buzzed an hour later with the familiar, sterile chime of judgment. Unauthorized peer-to-peer transfer detected. Credit score adjusted, -5 inches. And beneath that, a more insidious line. Reminder: unregistered donations undermine civic equity programs. I sat down hard on the nearest bench, the rain soaking into my collar, and stared at the message until it blurred. When I tried to swipe into the metro, my priority access blinked red. See agent. 3 words that said everything without needing to explain. I turned around without arguing, without making a scene because even a raised voice would log another deviation. I walked home. 5 miles through side streets and alleys where the cameras didn't track as tightly, past automated billboards that flickered encouragements to choose sustainably, live rewarded, their hollow cheer leaking into the rain like oil into water. I wasn't scared yet, not really, just unsettled, like standing on ground that seemed firm until you realized it was sinking sand. The third strike came less dramatically but landed harder. I borrowed a friend's car, an old model still grandfathered into the Urban Vehicle Compliance Program. Because public rentals were priced dynamically now, and my lowered score meant surge pricing that bordered on punitive. I had errands to run, appointments to pretend I could still afford, groceries to chase before my weekly access window closed. I didn't think about the mileage allotment caps until I parked. When the notification hit, it glowed red so bright it painted my sleeve. Travel allowance exceeded. Carbon offset penalty applied. Credit score adjusted. Minus 15. 15 points gone in a heartbeat. My profile dropped into orange territory immediately. I watched the app update in real time. My healthcare FastPass disabled, my smart fridge options restricted to state-recommended rations, my social streams throttled until alignment verification could be completed. I didn't even bother trying to appeal. The system didn't argue. It nudged. It whispered. It let you realize all on your own how easy it would be to come back, if only you stopped making choices it didn't like. No alarms blared. No enforcers kicked in my door. The punishment wasn't loud. It was slow, suffocating. Every purchase took longer. Every face behind every counter watched me just a second too long, smiling just a little too tightly, their internal readouts probably flashing my at-risk tag in soft yellow while they processed the risk I represented. I wasn't broke yet. I wasn't exiled yet. But for the first time in my life, I understood how thin the ice was, and how heavy even the smallest, most human steps could be when the system had decided to let you fall. The fall wasn't a sharp plunge into darkness. It was a slow, grinding erosion, a process so incremental that if you weren't paying attention, you might even think it was your fault. 2 weeks after my carbon penalty, I woke to find my balance intact but completely inert, a frozen sea of digital numbers that meant nothing. No transactions processed, no auto-billing completed, no subscriptions renewed. Just a blank, sterile statement at the top of my financial app. Account hold. Pending behavioral reassessment. At first, I didn't panic. I'd heard of this happening before. Glitches, administrative hiccups. People complained online, only to be reactivated after a few agonizing days of bureaucratic appeasement. But when I tried to file a support ticket, the portal redirected me to a compliance re-engagement form, which demanded a voluntary correction pledge and ongoing ideological alignment sessions. I closed the window without signing anything. A second later, my power flickered. Not completely off, just a dimming, a subtle reminder. Resource prioritization algorithms, they called it. Those flagged for reassessment weren't enemies. They were simply lower priority. By the afternoon, I had tried to buy groceries at 3 different stores. Each attempt ended the same way. A polite chime, a blinking terminal, a glance of manufactured sympathy from a cashier whose training told them not to react. Payment error. Behavioral review pending. I tried to explain that it was a misunderstanding, that my scores were usually good, that I had just hit a rough patch, but the words tasted pathetic, childish even, as they left my mouth. The system didn't need explanations. It had already made its assessment. I walked out empty-handed, past shelves stocked with fruits and bread and milk I could see but not touch. Hunger bloomed slowly behind my ribs, a dull throb. That evening, desperate, I tried to refill my transit card at a corner kiosk, one of the older models still running on semi-legacy protocols. For a moment, I thought it might work. The screen flickered, hesitated, and then froze, displaying a soft, condescending message. Access denied, pending stabilization. I kicked the base of the kiosk out of frustration, drawing a few cautious glances from passers-by, who quickly averted their eyes, the way you do when you see someone you know the system has already marked as unsafe. I ended up walking home again, my footsteps echoing too loudly against the empty glass of storefronts that wouldn't let me in. The city didn't push me out with force. It simply stopped catching me when I stumbled. When I got home, my building's lobby interface wouldn't accept my biometric handshake, not refused, just ignored. like I wasn't there. I waited until someone else entered, slipping through the door behind them, pretending to check my messages like I still belonged. That night, as I lay on the thin mattress in my cold, unheated apartment, I scrolled through forums and dark chat rooms, places where flagged users whispered in coded language about soft isolation, about managed decline, about being slowly phased out like deprecated software. No one described mass arrests, no gulags, no official charges, just a slow siphoning of services, a quiet narrowing of possibilities, until eventually you realized you weren't part of the network anymore. I found stories. People denied access to food programs, barred from medical clinics, denied housing renewals, people who simply faded. The next morning, when I tried to check into a local community shelter, my utilities had already started rationing themselves, and I knew it was only a matter of time before my access code was voided. The intake tablet scanned my ID and flashed crimson, "User not found." No apology, no explanation, just bureaucratic oblivion. I stood there for a long moment, feeling more exposed than I ever had in my life, as though everyone passing by could see the failure bleeding out of me. By midday, I stopped trying. Every app, every card, every platform led to the same blank space where my profile used to be. I wasn't a criminal. I hadn't broken any laws. I had simply ceased to meet the evolving definition of a participant. They hadn't taken anything from me. They had simply stopped letting me have it. And in the sterile, digitized hunger that gnawed at me with every failed attempt to live like I used to, a single, chilling thought took root. I hadn't been cut off. I had been erased. The city didn't change all at once. It simply became less and less interested in noticing me. Each intersection, each building, each vending kiosk, they were still there, still humming with life and data, but now I existed only in the periphery, a blank space they flowed around without friction, without engagement. The glossy surfaces that once reflected my preferences now simply returned cold, generalized images, offering no tailored prompts, no special access codes, no targeted messages. In a world built on personalization, I had become unclassified. I moved mostly at night, slipping through service alleys and transit corridors like a trespasser in a museum of my former life. The few remaining credits locked inside my deactivated accounts stared back at me mockingly whenever I tried, and failed, to use them. I wasn't broke. I was denied. A distinction that cut deeper than any number ever could. On the third day of my drifting, I found myself outside a defunct subway terminal on the city's edge, the overhead banners still advertising loyalty upgrades and social standing perks. The entrance was chained shut, but beyond the gate, I could see the faint glow of emergency lights still burning, forgotten by whatever maintenance schedules no longer included places like this. I needed shelter, and so, desperate, I climbed the fence. No alarms sounded. No cameras snapped awake. I was so far below relevance now that even security systems didn't bother to register my trespass. Inside, the stale air smelled of dust and ancient grease. I curled into the corner of a broken bench and closed my eyes, trying not to think about the slow degradation of my body, the hunger clawing at my gut, the aching dryness of my throat, the way my muscles trembled without command. I slept badly, dreams tangled with memories of soft system voices offering assistance, updates, choices, endless choices I no longer qualified for. When I woke, a man was standing a few yards away, not young but not old, wearing clothes that didn't glow, didn't transmit, didn't identify. His presence was calm, almost heavy. "You're losing signal," he said without preamble. I sat up slowly, my joints screaming protest. "What does that mean?" I croaked. He shrugged. "Means soon you won't even show up on passive scans. To them you'll just be ambient noise." I laughed, a raw, broken sound. "Already feels that way. He knelt beside me and pressed something into my hand. A piece of paper. Actual paper. Rough, torn from something larger. On it was a hand-drawn map, lines looping through wastelands and abandoned suburbs and into something marked only as Freedom Lands. Reservation, he said. Old word, new meaning. They never signed up, never synced. They kept breathing their own air when the rest of us traded ours for convenience. "It's real?" I asked, my voice brittle with disbelief. "More real than this," he said, gesturing to the silent world around us. He didn't wait for thanks. He didn't explain further. He just disappeared into the tunnels like smoke. For a long time, I stared at the map, tracing the route with a trembling finger. North. Always north. Leaving meant abandoning every remaining thread tying me to what was once considered civilization. No formal reinstatement waiting if I failed. No hidden forgiveness if I turned back. Once I stepped beyond the last grid beacon, I would become something else entirely. A non-entity by design. I folded the map with the reverence of a sacred text and shoved it into my jacket. The first steps felt lighter than I expected. A weight I hadn't realized I was carrying sloughed off with every stride away from the glow of dead terminals, away from hollow greetings and sterile warnings, away from a system that didn't even hate me, just found me inefficient. The city shrank behind me, not with the grandeur of a skyline fading into mist, but with the quiet apathy of a machine turning to face a more profitable direction. I walked into the dark with nothing but my breath, my battered body, and a name the system no longer cared to remember. The further I pushed into the wild threshold where the city's breath faded and the Earth's own voice grew louder, the more my senses began to reset, painfully, like stiff limbs remembering how to move without mechanical aid. The road, once smooth and obedient, fractured into angry seams and patches of brittle dirt. Overhead, the drones thinned until even their distant hum vanished, leaving only the sound of real wind, not regulated air currents churned through filtration towers. For the first time in years, maybe in my life, I walked without being counted. The hunger was sharper now, gnawing with feral insistence. I rationed the last shreds of my provisions, a few crumbling protein bars and the final sips of water stale from weeks in a plastic bottle. I tried foraging along the roadside, but the land near the collapse zones was sick, stunted, offering little but thorn bushes and brittle weeds. My legs shook from the effort of each step, my mind frayed at the edges, weaving hallucinations into the scraggly outlines of trees and abandoned vehicles. There were moments, brief and brutal, when I thought about turning back, about finding some checkpoint, some forgiveness center, throwing myself at the mercy of the system's bureaucratic heart and begging to be made useful again. But I knew it was a lie. Rehabilitation wasn't for those who drifted too far. It was for those who caught themselves early, who apologized before they cost too much to correct. I was already an expense no one was willing to absorb. On the fourth day, clouds bruised the sky, promising storms. I found shelter under a collapsed overpass where time had reduced concrete to crumbling bones. As rain sheeted down in waves, I huddled against the cold and tried to steady my breathing. I pulled out the paper map, now softening at the edges from sweat and rain, and traced the route again. North. Always north. It was sometime on the 6th night when I first saw the firelight. At first I thought it was another hallucination, a cruel mirage conjured by dehydration and exhaustion. But the flicker was steady, warm, impossibly real. I staggered toward it through the trees, every step an act of will against my collapsing body. The ground softened underfoot, no longer the dead-packed earth of abandoned sprawl zones, but fertile, breathing soil. The trees thinned into a clearing, and there it was. Life. Real life. Small homes built from wood and stone, smoke rising in delicate spirals from central fire pits, laughter carried on the clean night air without the metallic echo of microphones or ID scans. No blinking ads overhead, no AR overlays demanding my attention. Just fire and faces. They noticed me almost immediately, but no alarm sounded. No sentries shouted for ID. An older man rose from a low bench near the fire, his silhouette strong but easy, the way trees stand without needing permission. He walked toward me, slow and steady, his hands open at his sides. "You made it," he said simply, his voice carrying not surprise, not suspicion, but something else, a quiet certainty. I stood there, every muscle trembling, my clothes soaked and torn, my body gaunt and half forgotten even by itself. I tried to speak, but no words came. He didn't push, just stepped closer and offered his hand, rough and warm. "Welcome," he said. Someone pressed a cup into my hands. Water, clean and alive in a way I hadn't tasted in longer than I could remember. I drank greedily, coughing, spilling half of it down my chin. The man smiled, not the performative, scan-friendly smile of compliance, but something older, deeper. "No credits needed," he said. "No scores. Just respect." Around the clearing, others went about their business, unhurried, unbothered by my arrival. Children chased dogs through gardens where the only guards were hand-built fences sagging under the weight of vines. Elders tended fires and repaired fishing nets with calloused, patient hands. No one asked me where I'd come from. No one asked what I'd done to be cast out. In this place, survival wasn't proof of guilt. It was proof of belonging. I slumped onto the ground near the fire, feeling warmth seep into my bones, and for the first time since the system marked me as driftwood, I wasn't ashamed of existing. The first days passed in a haze, not from sickness or fear, but from a strange, disorienting relief so profound it made even simple acts, eating, breathing, speaking, feel ceremonial. There were no schedules flashing in the corners of my vision, no progress meters tallying my contributions, no reminders to smile for the network, just the sun climbing slow and sure over the tree line each morning, the smell of earth wet from night dew, and the unfiltered, unregulated pulse of my own heartbeat, asking nothing, demanding nothing. They didn't interrogate me here. They didn't sit me down for a reintegration plan or a behavior alignment interview. Instead, they handed me a hoe and pointed to a patch of rough soil where carrots and potatoes strained toward the weak spring sun. Work, yes, but not measured, not evaluated, not scored. It was enough to dig, enough to sweat under the honest sun, enough to help and be helped in turn. I learned the patterns of the village slowly, like fitting into a song you hadn't realized you knew the words to. Water from the spring at dawn, meals at noon and sunset cooked over open fires, repairs to homes and tools shared without negotiation or accounting. Children darted barefoot through the fields, their laughter sharp and clean, not the hollow gamified giggles of screen-raised kids, but something feral and electric. The food was simple. Corn roasted in fire pits, stews so thick you could stand a spoon in them, meat shared carefully and with reverence when a hunt or a trade was good. Nothing engineered for maximum efficiency. No nutrient bars laced with lab-grown compliance additives. No ration packs optimized for delivery drone payloads. Just food, real, uneven, alive. At night, we sat around fires, the stars unrolling overhead in dizzying, infinite coldness. No sound but the crackle of wood and the slow, timeless cadence of stories. Stories that didn't need embellishment because they were already miraculous. How the old ones survived the early integrations. How some walked away from contracts when others sold their faces and their futures for fractional upgrades. How entire families chose anonymity over access, memory over comfort. One evening, while carving a rough figure from a branch fallen in last night's storm, I noticed a boy sitting nearby, no older than 8, dark hair falling into his curious eyes. He watched my clumsy whittling for a while before asking, softly but without hesitation, "What's your name?" I hesitated. Not out of fear, but because the question struck something raw in me. In the city, names were keys, tagged, indexed, sold. Here, it was a gift, offered freely. I could have said anything, made up something new, reinvented myself. "Jack," I said finally, the word heavy and new on my tongue. The boy smiled, repeating it back to me like an incantation, not scanning it, not verifying it, just accepting it. That night, lying on a mat of woven grass under the open sky, the constellation sharp enough to cut, I realized something I hadn't been able to admit before. The system hadn't exiled me for breaking the rules. It had exiled me for not needing them anymore. Every monitored purchase, every authorized movement, every approved thought, it wasn't about survival. It was about predictability. And when I stopped behaving like a properly tuned node, I became noise, disposable. Here, unpredictability wasn't a flaw to be corrected. It was life itself. You woke when you were ready. You worked because things needed doing, not because someone tallied your labor credits. You ate because food was shared, not because an app approved your caloric intake for the day. Days stretched into weeks. My muscles hardened, my lungs expanded, my hands learned new shapes of work, mending fishing lines, splitting wood, coaxing reluctant seeds into reluctant soil. My laugh, once strangled by compliance anxiety, returned, rough-edged and genuine. One morning, the man with the long braid who had welcomed me found me stacking firewood by the communal oven. He watched me work for a moment, then said simply, "You're one of us now." No ceremony, no biometric confirmation, no badge printed and laminated for re-entry privileges. Just a quiet acknowledgement, given and received without transaction. I didn't cry. Not then. But later, alone by the stream that ran past the edge of the village, I let myself feel it. The crushing gratitude of being seen without being assessed, of belonging without needing to beg for it. The system had stripped everything from me, my status, my credit, my identity. And in doing so, it had given me back something I hadn't even realized I'd lost. My own life. Some mornings I would wake before the sun, lying still beneath the rough weave of my borrowed blanket, listening to the sounds of the world breathing around me. The low whisper of the wind threading through the trees, the distant shuffle of someone starting a fire, the soft mutter of water tracing its ancient path over stones. In those moments, when no screens blinked, and no systems pinged, and no unseen hand tried to optimize my next move, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, real time passing through a real body, unmeasured, untrapped. Sometimes, when the elders gathered to tell stories under the open sky, they spoke of how the world before the networks had changed, not with wars or decrees, but with slow, patient nudges. How people traded uncertainty for convenience, mystery for security, freedom for seamlessness. How the systems didn't conquer by force. They seduced with comfort, with predictive ease, until the idea of choice itself became a liability, a dangerous inefficiency to be managed. It was never about survival. It was about permission. And when you stopped needing permission, you stopped existing in the system's eyes. I thought often about the city during those nights, about the polished streets pulsing with curated ads, about the citizens moving like particles in a controlled current, smiling when prompted, consuming when suggested, drifting through lives so heavily optimized they barely noticed the weight crushing them. I remembered the fear in my chest when my score first slipped, the desperate scramble to stay within acceptable variance, the hollow hope that maybe if I apologized fast enough, adapted fast enough, I could be let back into the fold. But here, in the firelight, among people who measured worth by the strength of your handshake and the steadiness of your word, Those fears seemed so small, so absurd, so infantile. One evening, as the last light bled out behind the hills and the sky unfurled its ancient map of stars, I sat with the man who had first welcomed me. We shared a silence that wasn't awkward, but full, like a held breath between verses of a song. Finally, he said, "The city forgets you. That's their way. If you don't fit their story, you're edited out." I nodded, watching the embers drift upward like tiny spirits escaping gravity. "But we remember," he continued, "not because you're perfect, not because you're useful, because you're here." That was all it took. Presence, breath, choice. I realized, sitting there, that I didn't miss my old life. I didn't miss my loyalty tiers, my expedited services, my social validation stacked like hollow badges. I didn't miss my curated news feeds or my pre-approved experiences. I missed nothing because, in truth, I had been missing long before the system stopped recognizing me. The difference was that now, finally, I knew it. In the days that followed, I began teaching some of the younger ones how to carve figures from driftwood, crude little totems of animals and people, their shapes imperfect and lopsided. They didn't care. They didn't correct me. They just watched, eyes wide, hands clumsy but eager. One morning, I hiked beyond the edge of the settlement, past the last gardens and smoke trails, until the land opened into raw, untamed wild. No fences, no cameras, no satellites tracing my heat signature. The horizon rolled out before me. Not a boundary to be crossed, but a beginning too vast to map. I had no plans, no approved schedules, no itineraries optimized for maximum resource efficiency. I had only myself, only my breath, only my name, Jack. Not flagged, not logged, not scored, just spoken, just alive. I turned back toward the village, toward the thin thread of smoke rising in the crisp morning air, and I smiled. Not because some invisible metric would reward me for doing so, not because some app would tally it toward my daily well-being score. I smiled because I chose to. Because here, at the end of all their systems, at the edge of their engineered world, I had found something they could never digitize, never regulate, never own. I had found freedom, not given, not granted, simply claimed, simply lived.